Wind clawed the cliffs of Dragonstone and lifted the sea in long white fingers. Night pressed close, a black mantle stitched with faint stars, and the great castle sat like a crouched reptile above surf and smoke. In a windless hollow, the priestess watched the brazier and let the world recede until there was only fire. Within the flames, a hammer rang somewhere beyond stone and distance, not with the thin report of city smithies, but with a bell note that sounded the bones. Each strike drove sparks outward, constellations born and dying. She saw antlers standing in a field of ash. She saw salt streaming as rain on a black helm. She saw a boy whose blood ran like copper through a city of brick and rotting wood, glowworms of tallow in the alleys, a forge inside his breast that had never cooled. "Azor, Ahai," she whispered, and her ruby pulsed once against her throat. The wind caught the word and tore it to shreds, and still she smiled at the ruin of it. Even in ruin there was truth. The past years had been a litany of near-truths and errors of confidence. She had read the same signs and called the wrong name. Kings were forged as blades are, with heat, with hammer, with quenching that smokes and screams. She had thought to lay Stannis upon the anvil and swing. The hammer had not been hers to lift. She had been a witness only, a midwife with ash-stained hands, and she had forgotten her place. Now the fire made it plain. She saw the boy a second time as the vision rotated like a coin between finger and thumb. A line of small scars on his left hand from careless apprentice days, the stamp of sweat and soot long married to his skin, and the old simplicity that radiated from him the way summer radiated from the earth itself. Born in the stink and salt of Flea Bottom, raised by iron, apprenticed to the best of smiths. And the antlers? The antlers were not his to wear, not yet, but they hung in the air above him, potential maid emblem. "Bring me the boy," she said, quiet as if addressing the brazier. Then louder to those who pressed back into the darkness, her watchers, her servants, her unbelievers and believers alike. "Find me the smith with a crown he cannot see." They brought her a list of names and a map of half-truths. They brought her rumors of a bastard fleeing north in a knot of orphans, then captured, then escaped, then hammered into service in a band of outlaws who called themselves brothers. She remembered the hollow hills, the man with a new scar for each rebirth, and the Myrish priest whose wine-sour faith flickered with reluctance and stubborn light. She remembered a girl whose eyes did not blink at death, a little wolf among them. The fire had touched all these lives like a brush of burning straw. She held the map over flame until it curled but did not catch. "Riverlands," she decided. "If the brothers hold him still, they will trade." Her mouth tasted of iron when she spoke the next part. "If they do not, they will have debts. We will collect those instead." She rode with 6 guards, and a man who knew the river trails by smell. Spring was clawing its way out of winter, and the earth in the floodplains reeked of fresh decay. Men watched them from hedgerows. The priestess saw cold around some eyes, hunger around others, hatred pressing out of most. All flames, she told herself. All flames of one fire. If only they remembered. They found the camp at dusk, beneath a low hill pocked with stair-like shelves of shale. Spears pricked the gloom. Banners lifted, tattered rags with faded colors of old loyalties. Beric Dondarrion came to meet them with an unhealed cut on his jaw and a smile for Faith's sister. "Lady," he said, and the word contained equal parts courtesy and distrust. "Have you come to set more torches alight? We are in need of everything. Fire does not mend everything to a man's liking." "Nay, I have come to purchase what is mine," she said, and when he stiffened, she lifted a palm. "Not a soul, not a life. A boy you found, whom you have kept in iron. You know the one I speak of. Many boys," he said, "few men. You will have to be clearer." Antlers hang over him, though he does not know it. He smells of tallow and horses and hot iron. He does not speak unless he must, and when he does, the hammer speaks for him. Nah. Thoros of Myr had been silent behind Beric. Now he muttered something into his beard. "Your god loves riddles." "All gods do," she said almost gently. "Where is he?" Beric's smile did not change shape, but some heat left it. "If I give you the name and bring the lad, what do I gain? What does he gain? What price would keep your conscience from barking at your heels?" she asked. "Gold to feed those who starve in your hills. Fair passage for 10 of your youngest to a place where winter's hand will not close around their throats. And a promise, mine, that the boy will not be bled upon an altar to no purpose." "Men, no purpose," Thoros repeated, and there was a scrape in his voice that came from vinegar and doubt. "The red priests make a purpose of bleeding. The blind make a purpose of stumbling," she returned. "We can speak of theology over wine, priest to priest, another night. Tonight there is only this. Your bandmate of the broken will not be better for holding a single smith like a coin under the tongue. Give him up. There is a harder anvil that waits him." "No." Beric called for the boy. When he came, she felt him before she saw him, the heat of him, the stubborn, clean line of the forge inside him resonating with her ruby until the stone was warm against her skin. He was taller now than the child she had glimpsed in fire, broad at shoulder but not thick, wary in the eyes in the way of things that have been struck at and expect more. He looked at her like he would look at a new tool, to weigh if it fit the hand or would betray him. "You're taking me," he said in a voice that carried the flat certainty of the anvil. "I am delivering you," she said. "Do you know the difference?" "Not yet," he said. She bought him with food and coin and passage papers she had prepared on taut vellum, bearing signatures that would open gates that no longer believed in seals. He said very little on the road south. She left him alone to speak to the guards, to learn the way her people moved. Only once did she try to test the temper of him. "Do you know who your father was?" she asked when they camped by a stream, and she watched him polish the head of his hammer with oil he had begged from a miller's wife. "My mother," he said once that he was a man who never kept anything he took, so I knew not to wait for him. A hard lesson for a child. "I was a boy," he said with a stubborn lift of chin, "and boys are made for hard things. Some are made for fire. I'm made for hitting iron. That's hot enough." She let it go. The truth would come to him in its time or not at all. Fire could not be thrust into a heart like a poker. It must be coaxed. It must be fed. And sometimes it must be left to gutter and find its own tender. Dragonstone rose out of fog like a memory. The smell of brine sat upon every surface like bloom. He stood beneath a gargoyle and tilted his head the way a dog does when it hears its name in a new mouth. "I know salt," he said. "But this is a different kind of salt. This is old salt," she told him. "It has known kings and priests and dragons and the hush that comes when the sea argues with stone for 1,000 years. It is the salt your body was born of and will one day return to. Breathe it." "Nay." He breathed. Eyes narrowed. He had the look of a lad trying to memorize a pattern for a blade he'd never forged. She left him to it and went to face the man who believed himself a sword. Stannis Baratheon stood as if braced against a wind no one else felt, and looked at the boy as if he were another storm, one to be weathered or bent. He was thinner now, his mouth more aseam than ever, his eyes full of the arithmetic of hunger and duty. Davos hovered near his shoulder like a conscience he refused to admit had grown. "This is the king's bastard," she said, and watched the flicker. At last, there, something like surprise or fear, low as a ghostly fish turning in deep water and showing its pale belly. "I have bastards aplenty," Stannis said, but his voice was not contemptuous. It was tired. "If I wanted iron, I would send for the shops. Why have you brought me one boy and insisted my time is best spent this way, my lady?" "No, because your duty is to the living, not to your crown," she said, and the words did not taste as bitter as they would have a year ago. Perhaps humility had a flavor one could learn to stomach. "Because what you seek will be bought with other coin, and yours is not minted so." Davos touched his beard. "What coin is this boy then?" "Fire," she said. "Let me put him to the forge. If I'm wrong, you will have gained a smith and lost very little. If I am right, we will have a blade fit to face the thing coming out of the dark." "Nunterbei, wasim, nasi why?" Stannis' stare slipped to the boy. The boy's stare did not drop. Perhaps the king recognized something familiar there, the refusal to bend for the sake of bending. "What is your name?" he asked. "Gendry," he said. "You will serve here," Stannis said. "You will make nails, shoes, knives. If there is a prophecy in you, let it show itself through work. If the priestess bleeds you, I will know." "Nah, contempt." "She will not," Gendry said before she could answer. And if the king's mouth had been an iron seam, Davos grew a smile where stitches had been. "I'm done with being bled for other men's ends." She bowed her head. "I will not spill what you will not give." The first day he sought the forge without being told. He lit it and worked it, unfamiliar with its draft and temper. And by dusk he had learned all he could from watching flames alone. He cooled his hammer in brine and looked into the mirror of the slack tub while steam curled about his throat. "What do you want from me?" he asked her reflection. "What I want," she said behind him, "is irrelevant. A sea wanting a city is still a sea. It rises and falls without instruction." "I don't understand your talk," he muttered, but not unkindly. "I like words with edges." "The edges will come," she replied. "Will you come to the brazier tonight? I would show you how fire speaks." "Does it speak like a hammer?" he asked. And then when she opened her mouth, he shook his head. "No, Guy. Let me guess. It speaks like itself." "Aye." He came, though. He stood with both hands wrapped around the haft of the hammer as if it were a mast in a violent sea, and he watched. She did not press him. She called up the visions by leaning into the part of herself that had learned to doubt without dimming, and she fed him the pieces that could be held. He saw a shore of black glass and a snow-like ash falling out of a sky of old smoke. He saw a wall of blue light that was not light. He saw his own hands cupping a coal that did not burn him. "Am I supposed to enjoy this?" he asked, not moving, his voice lower than fire. "No," she said. "You are supposed to recognize it when it comes for you in the flesh. Nothing here is happiness." He snorted. "I prefer boots I can wear to purpose I can't hold." "Then let us make you boots," she said softly. "And a purpose that fits your feet. Bring me steel tomorrow. Bring me charcoal and salt and water. Bring me your blood in a bowl." He flinched as she knew he would. Then his nostrils flared. "How much?" "As much as you think is yours to give," she answered. "No more. If you give no blood, this will not be possible. If you give too much, we will lose you." "No." He came with steel and charcoal and salt. He came with water drawn out of the narrow sea with his own hands. He came with a small bowl into which he let drip the careful blood he had measured from his palm. Half a dozen drops that could have been more and would have been less had she asked for them. She warmed the bowl and whispered over it words she had learned as a child with salt in her hair and the taste of famine in her throat. "Do you know the story of Lightbringer?" she asked as the heat rose and the oil in the bowl carried the blood over its surface like red silk. "It's a sword in the stories," he said. "A king warmed it in the belly of a beast and then in his wife. I like neither of those things." "Neither do I," she said, and he turned to look at her then with something like shock. "We tell it wrong, perhaps. Or we tell it true and learn it wrong. The point was not a woman's suffering. It was the measure of a man's gift. I have sent men to death imagining it was sacrifice. It may be that sacrifice, true, is what you do to your own pride, to your fear. Steel will drink blood either way, boy. The question is whether it drinks yours willingly or steals another's." "Nanai." He started to laugh and swallowed it. "It seems I am to be hammered either way." "You always were," she said. "But this hammer you can hold." They forged then, together. He chose the billet with a craftsman's quick eye, drew it like taffy under hammer on an anvil worn into a shallow dish by 100 dead men's blows. The forge sang. She did not add spectacle, only made sure the draft was sweet, the heat even. She said nothing when he chased a flaw back to its origin and drew it out like a splinter. They quenched the first blade in seawater and oil, and it cracked down the center like ice in a thaw. He stared at it with the flat acceptance of a man who has known breakage since boyhood. Again, he said. The second was quick work and better. He cut a line with a file and set obsidian dust into the groove, packed it with clay, and brought the blade back to cherry, then lemon. He watched the colors with a lover's fascination, and she loved him a little for that, for the way work could be worship. They quenched it in brine and wine, and at his request, in his thin bowl of blood. The blade did not crack. It lay there sullen and good, hard and sound. It doesn't burn, he said to the steel as if to an uncooperative dog. It isn't meant to, she said. Not yet. Take it to the wall of your sleeping cell. When you wake in the dark, pick it up. Sit with it. Know it the way you know your own thumb. He took her at her word. He slept with the blade propped upright, the hilt touching his shoulder like a watchman's hand. When he woke near midnight to the sound of rain stepping lightly upon slate, he took up the sword and held it like a length of new iron. He could feel a small hum in it, as if the red dust in his blood had made a nest that sometimes a tiny creature crawled into. He breathed, and the hum answered. Shireen came to the forge on the third morning, bringing a book held carefully as a gift that might go to pieces at a touch. Her face was a small pale moon in the smoke. "Father says you are to be our smith," she said, proud, shy, brave. "I am Gendry," he answered, wiping his hands on his apron. "If I make nails that hold, will that please your father?" "It will please the castle," she said sharply, like a small teacher correcting him. Then she smiled because it was impossible not to. "I brought you a story of King Robert I of the Stormlands." He froze, and Shireen saw it. She had a way of seeing things that adults thought children missed because the truth embarrassed them. She set the book down upon a block and opened it with reverence. A painted stag leaped up from painted grass. A man with a hammer stared out of the page, broad and black-haired and grinning like a boy. It was a greasy tavern mirror held up to life. The boy and the painted man looked nothing alike, and yet in both the light hit the hair and turned it blue. "My mother named me for him," he lied. "Many mothers did," Shireen said, grave and kind and unsparing. "You shouldn't lie if you can help it. It makes the world make the wrong shape around you. Would you like to see the chapter about Storm's End?" He nodded. She read to him in the little hours between lessons, perched on a bale as if it were a throne, her voice sweet and precise. He made her a clasp of iron in the shape of a fish, and when she scolded him that her sigil was a stag, he made that too. Davos came by with hands that remembered rope and oar, and watched Gendry temper a chisel until it could bite granite. "You'll do," he said when the chisel sang against the stone. "You'll more than do. When men like us take the field, we don't do it for the taste of praise. We do it so there's something wise to put in a child's hand later. Remember that when she brings you books." What's to be put in my hand?" Gendry asked. Not quite teasing, not quite challenging. "A cause," Davos said. "I keep mine in my pocket like a rabbit, and I take it out to stroke when I'm afraid." "What is it?" Gendry asked. "People who work," Davos said simply. "People who are not princes and pay for princes' games." Gendry looked down at his hands. "I know those people." "I thought you might," Davos said. On the fifth night the wind went mad and painted salt upon every surface. Torches leaned. A crack opened in the sky, and in that crack the world bled. It was not a comet. The comet had gone, had scoured the air with red once, and left behind a trail of argument. This was something else. A brief wound, a foretaste. Melisandre saw it and went to the boy. "It is time to be born," she said. "We will leave before dawn. The wall calls." "Stannis wants the north," Gendry said, mouth tightening at the mention he could not avoid. Stannis will ride his stubborn horse toward the Winterfell that lives in his mind, she said. We go to the Winterfell that lives in the world's bones. If you are the blade, you must be where the edge is needed. Maiden. He did not argue. By then, the sword that did not burn had become an extension of his arm. He wrapped it in oilcloth and set his hammer beside his bedding to tell it goodbye for a time. Shireen found him at the quay while the tide ran black and cold and thanked him for the stag clasp. He bent his head to her as if to a lady, and she tried to make her curtsy graceful as stories said it should be. I'll make you more when I come back, he told her. Bring me a story instead, she said, of something you saw that no one else ever saw, so I can put it in a book and pretend I was there. He did not smile when he promised. Some promises work better without smiles. Davos watched them and wanted to press both into his coat to keep from weather and knives. The sea would not allow that, so he did what he could. He saw them to the ship. He balanced the weight of his guilt on the keel and found it did not sink. Storm caught them half a day out. The narrow sea's temper was an old song, but sometimes it forgot its tune and screamed. Sail tore in a mast and a man went with it. Water came like an accusation and took a breath for every answer they had. Gendry moved like men do when terror is a forge, focused, almost tender with each knot, each line. Once he slipped and the sea had him in a cold hand and pulled him under and under again. Melisandre saw the ocean fill his mouth, and the darkness pull him like a mother snatching a child from fire. And she did what she had not done in a long time. She feared. "Arlo," she said into the teeth of the storm. And for the first time in years, the name was not a trumpet but a plea. She did not promise anything. She knew better now. If there is heat left in me, take it. If there is breath left that belongs to me, take it and pour it through him. Take whatever you want that is mine, but keep what is his. She found him by knowing the place where he would be and putting herself there, by staying where the sea broke out of habit and presenting a net of possibility. When he slammed into her, she took that weight with a wrench of wrists and a cry she did not hear, and the men who still had their hands on something that did not move hauled them both in. He lay on the deck and brought up black water and the oil of the last meal in tepid convulsions. She knelt, pressed her palm to his sternum, and felt the faintest ember there answer the heat in her. She blew across his mouth as if across a coal. "Live," she said, simple as Davos. "You are not done." He coughed, and what came out was not seawater but a sound like something catching. He woke with eyes that had seen too many depths too quickly. "I had a dream," he said into the wind that was already lessening, embarrassed and hoarse. "I was under a roof of ice with a fire in my hands, and the ice liked me there. The ice wanted me. And there was a voice. It said my name wrong, and then it said it right." "What did it say?" she asked. "Gendry," he said. After all, they slept in shifts after the storm and made land 3 days later on a coast that looked as if someone had rubbed the color out of it. The wall appeared by degrees, the sky white behind it, the earth done at its feet like the hem of a king's garment trailing in mud. Men along the battlements were little black insects, moving in a script only they understood. Castle Black took them in with curiosity and a shortness of bread that made even stout stewards polite. Jon Snow, boy and man in one body, came to hear what this priestess and this smith wanted. He had a knife scar that said he knew what betrayal tasted like, and had decided to put his hand in its mouth again anyway. "Your God and our vows," he said to Melisandre, "have not always been friends. Vows are cords," she told him. "They bind you to the mast when the sea sings. The God I serve is heat. He does not need your love. He needs your work. If mine and yours point at the same enemy, let them touch." "Nay, and I will not burn men," Jon said. He looked to Gendry. "I know your kind." Gendry lifted a brow. "My kind looks like any other man. My kind hammers nails in your roofs and mends your hinges and cuts milk teeth free when they won't let go. What is it you know of me?" "You're from the bottom," Jon said. "I know the look of men who learn to stand up there. You do not bend easy. and you do not kneel to shine a lord's boot. That makes you trouble, and it makes you useful. Why are you here? Nami, and Badaran Shei. Because the north smells wrong, Gendry said, surprising himself. He had thought to repeat Melisandre's words with bluntness, but something older came up from him, something like memory. Because ice is moving like a beast that found its legs again, because I can make things that may help. And because she says I'm meant to be a blade for a thing with no body. Jon's mouth softened. He had wanted to be a boy who needed only swords, not words. Instead, he was a man who found he lived and died by them. We have obsidian, he said. We have more now than we thought to have. We had a cache under the old snow at the Fist, and men brought it out with frozen fingers. It sits on racks and in barrels while we argue what shape to put to it. No. Bring it, Gendry said. They brought it. He had never seen so much black glass, quarried with panic from the guts of the land. It glittered like beetlebacks in the low sun. He handled it as if it were a living thing, learned its weaknesses, its infuriating brittleness, the way it liked to shear instead of submit. He designed sockets in iron for spear blades and arrowheads, and built them so that when the glass shattered, as it would, the iron would hold the fragments in a stubborn cage, and the weapon would still taste flesh. Archers came by and his hands closed theirs around shafts, and he corrected their grip as if they were handling hot steel. Men from the free folk watched, eyes open with interest and suspicion both. Melisandre watched him become what he was and loved him for it, with a love that had nothing to do with hunger. She dreamed of flame and woke to breath in a cold room and touched the ruby at her throat, as if she might find there the pulse of who she had been before purpose turned her to ash. Her visions were full of snow now. Not just the weather, not just the man with the scar. Snow like a taste, like a hand, like a word you say over and over, until it stops meaning and starts meaning again. Whites came down one night when the moon was out, and the air lay still as if holding its breath. They came like a wind finds a crack, a slow seep at first and then a hammer blow, and men on the wall shouted in the voices of dogs and children. Gendry was in the yard fitting a spearhead when a horn blew from the east parapet, and the sound crawled up his spine. He took the spear and ran where the scream had pointed. What waited was ugly work, work that made the stomach try to climb into the throat and live there out of harm's way. The dead move like each bone had to remember its own duty. They were easy to knock down and hard to stop, and they kept coming and coming and coming, as if a river had found a new bed and intended to take the fort with it. He slid the obsidian spear through a thing's face, and it stopped as if someone had said its true name. A man beside him laughed with relief, and then something bit his cheek, and he screamed again. Gendry learned to thrust low, to use the haft like a lever and the butt like a cudgel, to trip and break and stab. He did not pick up the sword at his hip. He kept the spear in his hands because it was working, and he did not think about symbols. A shape moved on the ice beyond the light, not a man, and not a man. A suggestion more than a body, edges lost in white. The cold that came with it was not winter. It was the memory of a winter that had never ended. Men's breath plumed and became brittle forks of frost just above their mouths. Jon was shouting somewhere with a voice that had learned command and learned there is no such thing. A spear thrower turned and froze and fell like a dropped bucket. The thing raised its arm, and the dead on the ground twitched like fish when the wave recedes and leaves them alive by mistake. Gendry spit a curse that would have made Flea Bottom proud, and went forward into air that clawed the lungs, and tried to make ice of his eyes. The spear in his hand was a plank in a sea. He lifted it and threw like he had done for crows above rooftops as a boy. The iron weight flew true, and the black glass at its tip kissed something that was not skin. A sound like breaking glass and breaking bone and breaking silence happened all at once. The thing turned and was not there. In its absence, the dead lay down to rest like obedient children told it was time. Silence ferreted through the spaces between men after the clamor. Then breath returned with the shock of cold air after dousing. Jon's hand clapped Gendry's back twice, firm and grateful and unembarrassed. "That was well done," he said. "It made me colder than winter," Gendry said, and his teeth wanted to chatter, but he did not let them. "I'd like to be warm again." "Then come to the fire," Jon said simply. They came to the fire, men in a ring, women in the next circle out, boys who had lied about their ages with their faces striped with ash and pride and nausea. Melisandre held out a cup to Gendry, and he took it and drank, and for a moment the heat in him and the heat in the wine met and shook hands. He let his shoulders drop. He let himself imagine that this would end because they had done one right thing. The next day brought more dead, and the next less, and then there was a week where the North remembered what winter really was instead of what fear told it, and the wall breathed like an animal at sleep. Gendry used that week to begin again the forging he had left at Dragonstone. He spoke to Jon about a place that had fire under its bones, and a cache of glass where old dragons had spit and cooled. "We need it," Gendry said. "I can make 12 men more dangerous in a day if I have it." "Go," Jon said. "Take a ship and take Davos and take whatever the priestess says is needed to make the sea behave." He smiled halfway, the small, disbelieving smile of a man who still cannot quite accept that he says such things now. Gendry did not want to leave. It surprised him that his bones resisted the idea of distance. He looked north once and felt as if there was a rope from the back of his head to the white horizon. He went anyway because going was part of the work. They sailed, and the sea, remembering how she had nearly kept him, behaved like a mother on her best day. Sullen, patient, wet, and cruel, only in small, necessary ways. Dragonstone received them as if they had never left. Fires had their old tongues. Shireen had grown half an inch and learned another tongue she delighted in mispronouncing until he laughed. Stannis was gone north with his duty yoked so tight to him it had made grooves in the flesh. Melisandre went to the old caves where obsidian grew like teeth and put her hands to it the way a palm reads an old friend's face. Workers hauled the glass to the shore, and Davos lied with cheer to orderlies and stewards and men with lists about why the castle would not miss it. They loaded the ship. On the last night, Melisandre called Gendry to the forge again. He came with his blade in its wrapping, with the thin bowl that had held his blood once and might again. She had prepared a brazier and laid out her small things, powders and salts and oils, and the shards of a broken cup from Myr that did not want to be mended, and therefore taught humility. She had nothing grand. She did not need it. "When we go back," she said, "there is something I must do for your friend on the wall. I will need what heat I have left. I do not yet know how much that is. If there is to be a burning sword, if there is to be an emblem men can rally to when their eyes are full of night, it must be now." "Then let's try," he said, as he had said to the first broken blade. And there was something like affection in the way he said it to fate. She built the heat and called it sweet and clean as a baker calls bread to brown without burning. He placed the blade into it, and then drew it out when the color was right and struck, tiny blows that were more prayer than work. He incised a channel with the patience of a letter, and into that incision he let fall 3 more drops of his blood. His face turned away as if modesty applied to this too. She whispered, and the blood did not hiss but lay down like a dog. He added dust ground from a stone he had found on the road north, a pale thing the color of a child's first tooth, and he could not have said why. The blade took the dust, and it was gone. He set the hilt with a plain wrap of leather, and a small disc of antler he had carved without thinking of why he had chosen that material. Only that it was what the hand wanted to feel when it argued with the day. "Name it," she said. "It's a sword," he said. "It will be used. Let it hold its name until a moment earns it, not before." She nodded and felt, with a sense that belonged more to birds than to priests, that he had been right to refuse a name that would have been more theater than truth. They wrapped it and slept a little, and sailed at dawn with an extra weight to the hull and a lightness to their ribs that was not joy, only readiness. Winter had made strides while they were away. It had learned a new way to move over land, like a dancer invented in an old king's dream. Trees wore white coats the wind tried to strip off and failed. The wall looked older, and the men on it looked thinner, and Jon looked like something had turned around in him and seen him. The news came not long after their return. Men live alongside despair, like men live alongside dogs. Sometimes it bites, and sometimes it sleeps by the fire with its head on your boot. When the knives fell, they fell quickly, and with more than one hand. Boys who had said Ahai swore in whispers, and then took their oaths and twisted them into garrotes. Jon's blood made a map on the snow like a child's drawing of a river. The cold took him without ceremony. Melisandre saw what had been dreamed and failed and dreamed again. She was not surprised. Surprise is for those who do not live in fire. They carried him to a table as if he were a man fallen into drunkenness. Gendry watched as if a big hand had reached into his chest and tried to find the hammer there to fetch it out. Davos stood at the door and kept out the curious with words like stones. The room was a small one with a brazier, and the smell of onions someone had burned and been ashamed of. Ghost lay under the table, silent in a way that shouted. "Tell me what to do," Gendry said. Voice raw, blade wrapped in his hands like a relic that had not yet earned the name. "Tell me how to help." "You have already," Melisandre said. And she did not look at him because looking at him right then would have been like looking back over her shoulder while crossing a rope over a gorge. "Keep watch. Do not let the men with thin courage and many reasons come in here." He stood in the doorway with the spear he had made and the sword he had not named. Men came, and he said no, and they went and came again with clever excuses that broke in their mouths on his stare. Inside, she did what she had sworn she would not do again without certainty. She washed Jon's body with pure water and salt and the ash of old fires. She called the name of a god without deciding which he was, and she was not ashamed. She cut her palm and let that blood run into his mouth and out again as if it had returned from a place it disliked. She whispered and sang. And then finally she stopped all performance and set her hands upon his sternum like a mother waking a sleeping boy, and spoke to him the way women do when they will not accept a child remaining in the dark. "Come back," she said, not naming him, not naming anything. "There are still nails to hammer and roofs to raise and food to bake. There are lords and small folk and vows, and the old words that lose their edges if you leave them alone too long. Come back and help me keep the edges sharp." Ghost's ears pricked. Gendry did not allow himself to turn. He watched the corridor and imagined a field where grass bent one way and now bent the other. Jon opened his eyes to a room where onions had burned and a dog's breath steamed, and a woman with a ruby on her throat was weeping soundlessly, as if her tears were something she paid for and did not wish to show receipt. After that, faith became an economy again at Castle Black. Men traded in it with greasy fingers. Some gave it away. Some hoarded. Jon used it like any tool and tried not to break it. Gendry looked at him sometimes as if to ensure the soul had landed in the body correctly. Jon looked at Gendry sometimes as if to remind himself that the world had made strange new promises. News of Stannis came in ribbons. He had fought as he would fight, with stubborn brilliance, with a hatred of waste that cost him dearly, because sometimes the world requires you to spend. He had not taken Winterfell, because Winterfell was not a door that opened to stubbornness. The North had eaten him as the sea eats a ship, with no malice, only with appetite. Melisandre let herself feel that failure like a bruise she pressed every morning to remember it. Davos spoke Shireen's name scarcely at all. When he did, a light went out and came back in his eyes with effort. The wall could not afford a full grief. It made do with the half kind that allows work to proceed. Word came also from the east. A queen with 3 flames had moved. The sea had borne strange wings. Raiders told of men turned to charcoal in an instant. Old men at the fire shook their heads and said, "Dragons again, and we had it too easy for too long." And perhaps the others come to balance the account. Sometimes, when Gendry worked in the yard and the light lay on his sword just so, it seemed to him that the steel breathed warmer, as if something far away had answered it. They sent some of the obsidian south in crates cleverly marked as salted fish. They sent men with the knowledge of shaping it like a language they could teach. The gift went to houses that were not friends and were not enemies yet. The land learned a new craft with its old grudges in the room, looking on with arms crossed. When the queen from the east came at last to Dragonstone as if returning to an old house she had not known she owned, Gendry was there by chance and not by plan. Davos had taken him south as a courier, and because sometimes men who have nearly drowned want to see if the sea remembers and forgives. Melisandre stood upon the steps with impassive face and colors that set off flame and shadow. The dragon's shadows crossed her face and she smelled their heat and was afraid and exultant both. She had always worshipped heat at a remove. The remove flew now overhead and shook salt out of the air with each wing beat. The queen came with her iron counselors and her soft-spoken killer and her scars hidden where dresses do their mercies. She set her hand on the stone of Dragonstone as if greeting an old, contrary friend. "I have come home," she said, soft, and then louder for the benefit of ears. "And I will make a new house here." Gendry watched from the edge of the yard. He had a dislike for pageants. They reminded him of fairs where men made a game out of what cost other men sleep. And yet he was not immune to spectacle. He looked up when the great black dragon alighted like a coal made into a mountain and breathed a cough of fire that tasted of metal in the back of the throat. The queen put a hand upon its flank and it turned its head toward her like a dog. "Your Grace," Melisandre said without kneeling, "you carry the breath of the old made new. The north carries the breath of the older. Let them meet, and neither will be smothered. They will make a wind that moves the world." The queen's eyes were old and not old. She measured all things. She weighed and she judged, and then she moved. "I listened to many gods and men," she said. "I will hear this as well. But I will not burn men to buy a future even gods cannot guarantee." "Nor would I," Melisandre said, and the truth of that would haunt and steady her the rest of her days. "We require something stranger than blood. We require the mercy of craft." Gendry was brought to her attention because old men who had hammered nails and carried messages and seen boys stand their ground whispered his name like a good luck charm. He came unwillingly into her audience and stood with sea salt on his sleeves and soot on his cheek. He bowed as men of the bottom bow, like equal to equal, like saying hello. "You make weapons against the cold," she said. "You kill the dead." "I help other men do that," he said. "I can make a spear that does it better. I am a nail put in the right place." Her mouth softened at that. "And you are said to be of the blood of the king who took this place in one day and hit men like a bell." "The blood in me belongs to me," he said. "Men's blood does not always obey them," she said, dry as a winter leaf. Then, not unkindly, "Would you put your craft at my service?" "I will put my craft at the service of the living," he replied. "If you are their friend, then we're already working together." It was Melisandre who brought the sword to the dragon. It did not feel like a betrayal. It felt like completion. They had tried the forge and the sea, and the blood of a man measured out like salt. There remained the breath that had once made this island. If this failed, then they would try no more tricks, and the sword would remain a good sword and a symbol, only in the way all true tools are symbols. They set up the brazier on the lip of the old cliff where wind is born out of rock. The dragon was curious like all beasts who know their names and wonder what else they are called. It came when the queen spoke to it as one speaks to an old friend one owes money and love. It lowered its head and steamed the cold like a horse that has run. Gendry held the sword and felt it quiet in his hands. He nodded once to Melisandre. She touched the ruby as if to hush a child. "Now," she said. The dragon breathed, and the breath slid around the blade, and did not touch it for a moment because fire does what it wants and plays. Then, it fell in love with the steel. The leather smoked and held. The antler disc drank the heat and warmed like something animal. The blade itself did not redden. It took the breath the way a story takes truth, slowly, carefully, with an eye to how it sits, and then it gave back a small light that had no color. The men who watched shifted. Some made the sign they make when old tales come near from the side. Some laughed in fear. It did not flame. It did not cry out. The air around it became a degree kinder, the way a door opens on a warm room after a walk home. Gendry looked down at it, and for the first time since forging, he smiled while working. "Now," he said to the blade without naming it, and the blade said nothing back because it was not a person but a promise. The queen reached toward it and hesitated. "May I?" "It will not love you if you take it," Melisandre said before she could help herself. "It loves him, but you may touch, and it will not bite." "Nay." Daenerys Targaryen, who had known heat since a dark house and a faithful brother in a great fire, touched the blade and closed her mouth over a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. "It is warm," she said. "It is kind." "No," Melisandre said, and at once regretted the harshness of the word. "It is resolute. Kindness is the name we give to other people's resolution when it helps us." "Then let it be resolute alongside us," the queen said. "Bring it north with the ships and the salt and the men with eyes that have seen what cold can do. Bring it where it is needed." They came as armies come and as crafts come, in fits and starts, and with arguments in the holds and old songs on the wind. The dragons shrank the world as they moved, as if the world were a piece of wool held over steam. Men who had never thought to stand together stood together. Others who had never thought to kneel bent their heads because the air told them to. The wall still stood. The land beyond it had moved closer somehow. Winterfell received them in its old way, with its old fire stubborn under the stones, with its trees who had learned to watch. Sansa Stark stood in a hall where she would once have curtsied and now bowed her head as men do when they bless bread. Arya moved like the idea of a girl and not like the girl she had been. She looked once at Gendry as if looking down an old alley, as if remembering a loaf with warm raisins and a dirt-smudged hand. He looked once and then looked away, because the world was very full, and some looks must be saved for when they can be born. They went out to meet the thing in the snow when it drew near enough to be called a battle and not a siege. The day was a grave cloth. The air stood too still. When the first ranks of the dead filed over the ridges, it was like watching a tide come in made of bones and coats and the mistakes of men. Dragons flew once and twice, and the dead did not care as much as men had hoped. They cared when flame found the figures among them taller and more precise, with eyes like the heart of ice. Then they cared and fell apart, and then more came and came, as if the earth had devised a way to keep secrets no longer, and was coughing them all up at once. Gendry stood with spear and with the sword that was warm. He found that standing had become what he loved best about himself. He had been a boy who moved toward his work all his life, and he had arrived here. He did not swing the sword about his head. He did not carve his name into men. He used it as a man uses a tool he respects, carefully, and only when the work requires it. When a blue-eyed figure came near with not men at its flank, he went to meet it like a smith goes to a bar that wants to be knives and will not admit it. The first touch of the blade on the thing's spear made a sound like wet slate struck with bone. The thing looked down at its weapon as if betrayed by an old friend. Gendry stepped in with the memory of Fleabottom in his footwork, quick, low, unashamed to look like a brawler. He found the angle at the armpit, and he pressed the warm edge into a cold nothing, and it was like cutting the idea of ice. Light, not bright, not grand, only a small corrective, ran up the blade and into the air, and the tall figure came apart in a sigh. The whites around it sagged into the snow, not dead because they had been that already, simply released. "Good," he told the blade. Men came and fell and rose without breath and fell again. He did not keep score. He only kept going. Jon was there and then was not, moving where the thing thickened and thinning it. The queen rode her dragon like a woman who learned to walk on a deck and never got off. Melisandre stood on a hill with a small fire and her hands outspread. She had never thought she would again ask nothing for herself. It was a savage joy to want nothing. She burned what she had left and felt the sky a little freer for the offering. Night came all at once as if the day had been a bluff called. In the dark, the warm blade was a hand on a shoulder saying, "Keep moving." The work became smaller then, closer, uglier. He learned the shape of terror in men's mouths. He learned the feel of resolve when a boy stiffens his spine without thinking. He gave what he had and took what he must. He felt himself empty and fill, bellows for a greater forge. He laughed once, a short bark that frightened him, because he recognized the love of this. Toward dawn, the idea of dawn, not any light, the cold sharpened. The dead moved with a new coherence, as if a conductor had lifted his baton somewhere out in the rising white. The dragons screamed above in a way that said pain as well as anger. Gendry felt the tug of the rope at the back of his head, the one that ran north, go taut. He turned to see a shape on the far rise, singular, crystalline, the suggestion of a crown upon its brow, not of antler but of broken spears of frost. Men around him went still as fear does to prey. Melisandre, far behind, felt something in her chest decide to let go. "Now," she whispered to no one. "Now, now, now." Gendry did not think of kings. He did not think of crowns. He thought of the first strike of a hammer upon anvil in the morning, the way it tells your hands whether you are yourself that day. He moved toward the rise without telling anyone, because telling makes a thing thinner sometimes. He carried the spear in his left and the sword in his right, and he did not pray. He did not think the other had made him. He thought the world had, and this was only the world collecting a debt. The figure upon the rise turned to him, and a wind started out of nowhere and came from 1,000 years ago. The ground between them became treacherous. Snow sloped where it had been flat. The air tried to make him lie down. He put his head down, not in supplication, in stubbornness, and went. The spear went first, thrown as if at a rooftop crow. The figure caught it with movement too delicate to be combat and broke it between fingers. It looked down at the obsidian as if at a flower trampled by mistake. Gendry came on. It raised a hand. He felt his bones wish to break to please it, and he told them no. He told them something from Flea Bottom, where you keep your bones because your bones are all you have. He lifted the sword, and the air around it grew kinder, a small room inside the gravecloth of the day. The figure stepped into that room without meaning to. It tilted its head, curious as a child at a flea circus. "It's only a blade," Gendry said to it, "and I'm only a man." And then he did something he had known he would do as soon as he saw the rise. He put the point of the blade at his own palm, where it would pass through and into that knot chest. He did not hesitate. He did not make a show. He drove the blade, and his hand went with it, and the pain opened his mouth and made a sound of him that was not a cry nor a laugh, but the bell note of a hammer. The warmth ran through him into the steel, and the steel into the cold, and a long sheet of glass inside the day cracked. The figure looked surprised. It might have been sadness in the ice of its regard. It did not have time to decide. The warmth went where it was needed, because warmth is efficient that way. The figure shattered, falling in pieces that did not hit the ground because they remembered being snow and obeyed that older law. The rope at the back of Gendry's head went slack all at once, as if cut. He fell with the blade through his hand, and the world came back in its millions of awful details. The taste of iron, the smell of men, the ache in his hips where old bruises woke, the ridiculous knowledge that he had lost a good glove. Men around him shouted. Some charged aboard a victory that had no captain. Some wept. The dragon called Jairna. No, that was an old name Melisandre had muttered once. The queen had named him another, canted low and breathed, and the day was suddenly a thing men remembered again. He woke later to the feeling of someone stitching his palm with gentleness learned the hard way. Arya Stark sat unchanged and entirely different, threading a needle through him like a woman sewing a flag. She did not look up when she spoke. "You always had thick hands," she said. "I lost a glove," he said, and she made a sound that might have been laughter. He stared at the roof of the tent that somehow had found the smell of onion again and said, "Is it over?" "For the moment," she said, and tied a knot with economy. "We get moments. That's as much as anyone ever got." Me. He slept and woke and slept. He dreamed of forges that went out but left heat in the stones for a long time. He dreamed of a little girl with a book telling him not to lie to himself. He dreamed of Davos cutting bread with a blunt knife and being content with the way it wrecked the slices. He dreamed of Stannis at last liking a thing simply because it worked. He dreamed of Melisandre standing upon the hill, fire guttered, ruby cold, looking at the horizon with a relief so complete it nearly killed her. When he could walk, he went to find the priestess. Winterfell's Godswood had that embarrassed silence of places too old to applaud and too stubborn to turn away. She sat beneath a branch without snow, as if it understood hospitality. Her face was thinner than it had been, which was saying something, and the ruby did not glow. She held it in her palm like a thing she had not stolen and might give away. "I thought I was meant to be the hero," she said, smiling in a way that had no edge, no irony. "And I find I am happier having been the woman who brought him to the door and told him to mind the step. Midwives are heroes when the child breathes," he said. She looked up at him and he saw then how old she was, and how young. The truth sits on faces at the end like that when men and women have done as much lying as they can stand and have decided against it. "You did not kill a lover," she said. "You took your own hand. I have been wrong about so many things, and I am grateful for this right thing that shames my old stories." "I took my own hand," he agreed, and flexed the stitches. "It will knit with a lump. I will feel it every time I hold a hammer." "You will remember," she said. "That is all we can ask. We are stupid creatures who need our bodies to teach our minds." He sat beside her. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "men will pull down the tents. They will count the dead. Someone will make stew of a deer that ought to have lived longer. The queen will make kindness into policy, and someone will hate her for it. Davos will teach a boy his letters, and the letters will be the boy's only property that can't be stolen. Jon will feel the weight of living and wish to be a boy in the kitchens, and then remember the smell of onions and be glad because it means people ate. Sansa will make a list and cross things off, and invent a new way of being a Stark that will offend every ghost in these trees, and please them anyway. Arya will vanish and turn up and force men to recalibrate their fear. And you, she said, at last turning to him in full, you will make nails again. You will set hinges to others' doors, and teach boys and girls how to burn their fingers less. You will be offered Storm's End and refuse it if you are wise, and accept it if you are wise in a different way. You will be loved by women and envied by men, and you will wake sometimes in the night with your hand hot and the sound of glass breaking in your ear. You will live. Will you? I have burned, she said quietly. There is a sweetness to ash when the fire had a purpose. I will stay until I am not needed to speak of what happened before it becomes story. Then I will go where heat is thin and the stars are many. I will watch for another child who needs to be fetched. He thought of the bottom then, of the stench and the laughter and the crooked alleys where a boy learns to put his back to stone. He thought of a hammer on his birthday and how the sound had told him the truth without him knowing he had heard it. You could come to the Stormlands, he said, not quite believing he said it. She laughed, genuine and almost girlish for a heartbeat. The folk there would think me a witch who eats their smoke and steals their daughters. Besides, I am no lady for houses that need mending. I am only a woman good at showing doors. Nei, pandei, kapanme, petao, ashami, kante, karne. He left her then, and went to the yard because the yard is where he understood best the language of days. He unwrapped the sword and looked at the antler disc and thought of the queen, and of Jon, and of Davos, and of Shireen, and of Stannis, and of a man with a hammer painted in a book. He thought of Thoros and Beric, and the hollow hill, and the bargain struck. He thought of Arya's needle pulling his skin together and how there had been no tremor in her hands. He thought of Melisandre and her empty ruby and how light leaves and returns. Lightbringer, a boy said behind him, reverent and sure. Is that what it's called? Gendry ran his thumb over the warm leather and shook his head. It's a good blade, he said. It isn't a story. It does what it is asked and then rests. If you want to give it a name, give it the name of the person you protect with it. That will make you careful." The boy blushed as if struck and considered. "I'll call mine Mother," he decided, ridiculous and perfect. "Then your grip will always be right," Gendry said, and put the sword away, not because he feared it would be stolen, but because some things are best not admired into uselessness. He took up a hammer. He took up nails. He took up a child's hand and placed it on a handle in a way that would not split skin. He took up the day. When the Queen later offered him Storm's End, the old castle with its screaming winds and its walls, like the idea of a fist made in stone, he stood before her and thought of every door swing that creaked along the narrow sea. He felt the tug of blood that had never paid his rent, and the tug of men who would live and die by decisions he made in a room with maps. He did not crave power. He craved the right shape of things. "Storm's End belongs to Storm and to those who know what storms do," he said. "If you need a man there to keep the doors hung and the hinges oiled and the hearths hot, I can do that. If you want a parade, ask another. I want a steward who knows what a hearth is for," she said. "And a lord who would rather fix a leak than be praised. Storm's End will trouble you and cherish you. Take it." "Nay, and then to bed now." He took it because he was wise that day in that way. He went to the castle and walked its rounds and learned its humors. He stood on the sea-facing wall at midnight to make sure the wind had not broken and could still sing its old song. He sent ships north with tools and men who knew to use them. He sent casks south to those who would never sip from ceremony. He let the sword hang where it frightened no one and comforted some. He kept his hammer by the door. Melisandre came to visit once, years after, looking more like a woman who had learned to eat and less like a flame that had forgotten how. She sat with him by a low fire in a room that had never liked to be warm and talked of a boy in Mar who asked too many questions, of a girl with a book in a stone castle by the sea who would have made a fierce priest if priesthood had been made for women like her. She told him a story about a desert where the stars are so close you can choose one to speak to. He poured her wine without ceremony. "Do you think you were Azor Ahai?" she asked at last, and the words did not break the room. They drifted like embers. "I think I was Gendry," he said, and that was enough. She nodded and seemed, for the first time he had ever seen, satisfied as one is satisfied after a simple bowl of something that tastes like childhood. "We deliver what we can," she said. "Sometimes it is a sword. Sometimes it is a child. Sometimes it is a man to his right name." He smiled, and the storm outside pressed its face to the glass and laughed like an old friend at the door. He rose to tend the fire and found, as always, that the work was the answer. He opened the door and let in a slice of salt and noise. Somewhere in the dark, waves struck and broke and struck again, and each time they sounded like a hammer on an anvil. One, then one, then one. And the sparks went up invisible into the wet night and did their small necessary work.